Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
In this episode, I'm in conversation with Ramesh Shastri, an IT industry veteran who, for the past 5 years, has moved to the social sector, working to improve the livelihoods in the handicraft sector. In this conversation, he shares his experience with creating some of the very early and successful products for the Indian market and how the skills that he acquired in the IT industry are helping bring in change in the handicrafts industry. Listen on. Hi, Ramesh. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Thanks, Shuguru, for inviting me to your podcast. Glad to be here.
Even though we've known each other for a long time, I found that these conversations always are revelations for me. A lot of new stories and their experiences. Sometimes we may not have discussed this. And to trigger all that off, if you can start with your origin story, how you got into IT and then where you are today, we can probably take it from there.
Yeah, sure. As all of us, we studied together at Indian Institute of Science. And then, of course, we went looking for lucrative jobs. You know, we were from middle-class families. So we actually sort of gravitated to IT because at that point in time, it seemed to be the most rewarding job out there. So I think that's how I started, like most of us did about 40 years ago. And I got into IT, of course, went through a series of different jobs. And my jobs changed with the times. So I think I ended up spending about 38 years in the IT sector.
Essentially, I know that you, from an individual contributor to running a big profit center, offshore center, all that. So it'll be interesting for our listeners.
Yeah, sure. As usual, most of us started at the bottom of the rung of the ladder, which is basically a technical programming job. And then we moved into positions of management and then managing a business unit for a company. So that's how, I've grown too. The first 10 years was a very technical job, basically building software, building systems. I started as a systems programmer, then moved into basically business applications and products and then services. So sort of traversed the whole gamut of whatever the IT industry was doing at various points in time. So there are different periods. If you were to sort of look at your career in terms of, and the IT sector in terms of different times, there were the 80s, and there were the 90s, and then there was the post-2000 phase. And of course, there is the now. So if you look at the 80s, I had at least very technical jobs. And then basically, it's in the 90s with the liberalization that happened in 1991 that the Indian industry, IT industry took a sharp turn upwards with all this offshoring projects that really took off in the 90s with the communication links and also the offshore development centers. So that took us through the 90s to the Y2K area. And then in Y2K, of course, we solved the Y2K problem for the rest of the world. And then, of course, those who came to get their Y2K problem solved in India using offshore resources continue to actually sort of accelerate the use of offshore development for app support. So that's how the IT industry grew phenomenally up to 2000. And today, it's headed towards a $200 billion business for India, the IT sector. And when we started, it was probably, just a few $1 million. A couple of $1 million to $200 billion is a massive in a roller coaster ride for the IT industry and all of us who participated in the IT industry. So I'm actually grateful to have been a part of this roller coaster ride.
Yeah, Ramesh, that's really interesting. Talk about the roller coaster ride. And how was your own outlook or the way you were handling your responsibilities when you said initially you started as a coder to even running a business unit? Was it something that you enjoyed or was that stressful?
No, I have enjoyed all the 38 years or so that I have spent in the IT industry. So we've had all kinds of things thrown at us, and if you were able to catch it and run with it, we did well. So in that sense, it was fun. I think as long as you've basically are open to going into uncharted waters, I think you'll have fun, and that's been my essential experience. So, for example, in the 80s, I used to work for this company called Sonata Software. We were actually developing products for the Indian market. Not many companies were actually succeeding in developing products for the Indian market. So it's a big challenge. And then after stumbling on developing various different kinds of B2 products that were sold in the US, we were sort of trying to make them in India. We stumbled upon a desperate need for desktop publishing software in Indian languages. So, at that time, I remember we worked on this product called Prakashak, which was basically a desktop publishing language. And we produced it in about 10 different Indian languages. And actually, it was a big success because, nothing could be imported to support Indian languages. And the printer, the small-time printer, had no real options. They were the very expensive monotype, linotype machines to do page composition. There was nothing virtually on a desktop. So I think coming out with a solution that was sort of that addressed the needs of the Indian market was actually a very successful product, I would say. So it required a lot of things, like, for example, working with Indian fonts, building a word processor for Indian languages is very different from basically doing English language word processing. There were no actual fonts available in Indian languages for the computer at that point in time. So we tied up with basically a typeface design company in Pune. So I think digitizing those fonts and using those fonts in the word processor and in the publishing software were actually really challenging problems to solve, and we actually eventually solved them. So I'm happy to say that product actually ran for almost 10 years. Even after I left the company, they were actually selling it, and then the company was actually earning revenues of that product. So that to me was a very good example of actually using technology that benefited us here in India.
Yeah, that's very good. You mentioned two things. I'm just trying to connect the two. One is about being comfortable with uncertainty. And second, even the shift from a project thinking to a product thinking. And typically there is one complaint against the quote unquote engineers who others say that want everything to be perfect, specified, detailed, and all that. So how did you handle this uncertainty? Are there any tips for engineers to live with ambiguity, or even when you get into maybe more managerial roles, there are a lot of things that are undefined. So correct. How do you focus on what needs to be done or what can be done?
Yeah, that's a good question, Shiv. Essentially, I think, you must actually listen to customers. You must actually spend time understanding basically the problem. It's not the technology that is important. It's the final solution that you actually build for your customer that's important. So I do remember, when we were digitizing fonts, some of my engineers who were involved in that found that to be extremely boring. They said, I'm wasting my time. You should be writing C or C++ code, basically looking at how to digitize fonts. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, actually the fonts actually won the day for you, because we were able to provide, because the fonts that printers use are extremely artistic fonts, and you cannot just use ordinary fonts. So because they're doing printing work, so so that's the problem to solve. how do you sort of get fonts that they require? So essentially, I think you have to focus more on what helps the customer solve his problem. And technology comes later. It's just a means to an end. And that would be basically my advice to anyone who is wanting to develop software products is, first look at the customer problem and then understand it. And then, as historically, most projects fail because you never understood requirements properly. And that's even more important when you actually build products, because you can get it completely wrong. Nobody pays for the product upfront. You just have to make money after you sell the product. So you can't sell the product if you've not got what the customer wants right. So I think product development does teach you a lot of lessons in that sense.
And you've also been mentoring startups.
I did do it. This is more like a post-retirement job. So essentially, started mentoring startups, and then I got into the social sector, which requires a lot more mentoring. What I found was basically that at the end of the day, you need to learn how to run a business. So I think that's where, whether it's startup in the tech sector or in the social sector, the challenges are the same. The entrepreneur or the inventor, he's got this great idea, but he doesn't know how to sort of make a business out of it or make any money out of the business. So I thought whatever I learned, I could basically pass on.
That's an interesting position, or one question that I've always had is in the social sector, we normally talk about the impact being created.
Right.
And in the IT sector, yes, we do talk about impact, but not in the same extent. It is more about either market share or can I get revenue, and it's more immediate. And you have those pressures of maybe quarter on quarter growth, etc. So how are you able to reconcile the thinking in terms of impact, which should be long-term in the social sector, coming from the corporate sector?
Yeah, sure. See, again, I want to go back and relate it to some of the things that we did in the IT sector, and then relate it to what the challenges are in the social sector and how they may be a parallel to what happens in the corporate IT sector to the other sector. For example, all this offshoring actually started in the 1990s, and it just took off in the 2000s. I mean, the whole concept was offshore development centers actually providing services out of India. And if you see, basically, the software sector took off for various reasons. One was adoption of technology. Computers and software was actually quite affordable if you see, compared to other areas like manufacturing, as technology was actually affordable. And basically, while there was a lot of skill available in the country, just combining basically the skill with technology was an enabler to actually go out and reach international markets. And for a long time, and even today, about 90% of our revenues actually come from overseas markets. So exports have always been an important thing. I come here to the social sector, and I just want to talk a little about what I'm doing now, which is I work with this NGO called Maya, which has done basically a phenomenal amount of work in Channapatna in the Ramanagaram district, primarily trying to sort of help the artisans of Channapatna who make these traditional wooden toys. So we run basically a livelihoods initiative in Channapatna, and I've got involved with this mission for the last 5 years, and I've been looking at this toy making industry, and I find quite a number of parallels. I mean, one is the Indian wooden toys or handicrafts have a very small percentage share in the international market. Today, in India, there are about 6 million artisans who toil and make all these handicrafts. Okay, we sort of employ almost about 40% of the world labor that makes handicrafts. But when it comes to market share, we are actually less than 3 or 4% of the entire market share. So you have basically a population base, a world population base of 40%, which actually contributes only 3% of basically the revenues of the handicraft sector. So I see basically a big parallel where you can actually sort of focus on exports and make the handicraft sector a lot more viable, sustainable, and it actually can increase the earnings of basically the artisans. That's where I see a parallel. When we started in the IT industry, we were all great engineers, highly qualified, but there was enough talent in the country, but the real opportunity came when we actually took to exports. So I think there is a parallel in what we can do in the handicraft sector. That's my 2 cents of understanding of this business. Any questions there, Shiv?
Yeah, I mean, whatever you say, it triggers a lot of questions.
Right.
For example, in the IT sector,
Huh.
at least we have, the Indian industry was fairly quick to adopt some of these standards
Right.
and certifications and so on, to instill confidence
Right.
in our customers. In the toy sector, again, these are a layman's point of view, that I believe there are a lot of standards and stringent requirements in terms of safety for kids, in terms of how the toys are designed, or the kind of paint that is used, which has to be non-toxic, etc. In this unorganized sector, as you said, when we have so many artisans, how are you going about bringing in some of these? And did anything that helped you in the IT sector, do you find that useful for this sector also?
No, sure. That's absolutely a good question. In fact, just historically, Channapatna was sort of exporting handicrafts to a reasonable extent till 2008. 2008 was also when I think, for some reason, we opened up the sector to imports from China. And that actually took severe, so the handicraft sector, particularly in Channapatna, and I'm sure there are other sectors in India also, took a heavy beating because of the cheap Chinese imports. And if you go to see, basically there are a lot of Chinese toys that are palmed off today as Channapatna toys, which is quite sad because they are not traditional, because the guy on the street there has to earn his living. So things like that are happening there. You're right, actually, and because of which also the standards have fallen. At one point of time, there were only natural dyes that we used. The traditional toy making industry in Channapatna used natural dyes. So it's an interesting way they make toys. They make toys out of this wood called hale mara or hale wood, which is soft and white. And it grows in the non-forest, non-farm lands. And it's just sort of all natural. So no pesticides or no fertilizers were used to growing the tree. It was just picked up naturally from the forest area. And they use lac, which is basically resin, insect resin that grows on trees. And then basically they mix it with all kinds of dyes, like turmeric, for example, to get yellow color, indigo to get blue color, and then variety of other natural things. So these were what was actually used. So now what has happened is, basically because of the cheap Chinese imports, they try to compete with them, and they ended up using actually a lot of toxic paints actually in making toys. And all this actually resulted in exports coming down, because basically, when they started looking at the toys, all these things happened. So in Maya, basically, we sort of consciously decided that all toys will actually use only natural lac colors. And we've also gone through this whole regime of testing toys. So today, toys made by us are compliant with European standards. They are also compliant with American, US ANSI standards. So, it's not very difficult actually to comply. It's just that we need to have a discipline to comply with them. So now I think one way is to actually ensure that we bring in these standards to the entire craft cluster. So you can't do it just isolated ways. You have to actually look at how to approach the entire craft cluster. And if you are interested, I can talk about how we plan to do this.
Yeah, in fact, that was going to be my follow-on question.
Yeah, I don't want to be long-winded and ramble on without answering anything specific that you have in mind. But
No, this is all triggered. Now, once you explain this, I'll probably ask my question.
Okay.
definitely is about working with the craftsmen.
Right.
Yeah.
So essentially, like I said, if you look at the craft industry, they were about, if you go back to about 15, 20 years, there were about 3,000 artisans. That number has actually come down to 750 people. We actually did a very comprehensive artisan survey of their social background, economic background, their skills, and what is it that they're looking for. So there has been a massive attrition from the traditional artisan community. So that number has come down to about 750. So we have a plan actually of, so what we did was, rather than, it's completely unorganized. So there are a lot of small units, 4 people, 5 people, 6 people, 10 people lathe units, where these toys and handicrafts are made. So what we did was we sort of created now what is called as a producer company. Producer company is like a collective. It's the artisans are owners or shareholders in the company, and they get compensated for what they produce. And that's the principle of the producer company. So, so we found a producer company which has about 500 members, and our goal is actually to go to about 250 in 3 years, and taking up to 500 plus artisans being a part of this artisan producer company. And to support this artisan producer company, so Maya as an NGO went and approached for, made a proposal to the government of India. So there is a Spurti scheme, scheme of fund for regeneration of traditional industries. It's under the MSME ministry. So our proposal is accepted. And so what the MSME department has done is given as a grant to set up what is called a CFC, a Central Facility Center, which will act like an incubation center for artisans. So we will bring in basically a design studio. For example, what needs to be done is we need to take old designs and make them more contemporary. So we need design interventions. The other is basically technology has not been upgraded for the last 60, 70 years. We're still making stuff on the same old lathes. So we are bringing in new machinery that will actually speed up the way in which the products will be made. So and then we'll also have a training center where we will actually do skill upgradation. We'll come up with basically skill assessment and basically how to move people from one skill level to the next skill level. So we've come up with training programs for that. So we want to put all the 500 artisans through this program and get them to a stage where actually they'll be able to produce quality products. They'll be able to produce to standard specifications. So we are also bringing in a bit of engineering discipline. For example, we need to teach artisans to read an engineering drawing. So today, for example, in our design studio in Maya, we are actually doing some basic designs on AutoCAD. So, it's unheard of in the unorganized sector. So you do design without actually, making stuff first, which is how, the auto industry or any other industry does. So the whole idea is we create this central facility center, which will be available to all the artisans to come and get what they want. We'll also train them to become entrepreneurs. So they must be able to sort of manage their own small units. Actually, they'll be part of the collective, but they will work on basic orders. So that's the culture that we are trying to bring about among the artisans. And then, we're also looking at a hub and spoke model. So if you see the current, there are about 15, 16 areas in the Channapatna district where basically people make these toys in small units. So we are actually going to create a hub and spoke model. Spoke model is we'll have a small unit, about say 10 lathes. It'll be basically, this producer company, which is called Artisan Pride Producer Company, that will set up the lathe, the facility in the area where actually artisans live and work. So this is how we want to sort of reorganize the industry in a way that actually it benefits, livelihoods and their earnings go up. And of course, on the front end, we have to actually learn all the new age marketing techniques. We got to get online. We got to understand social media marketing. So we've created a front-end marketing company which will actually do all of this and promote the products made by the artisans. So that's the general goal. So if you see, all of this was in some ways done in the software industry. So So that's where I see a parallel. What we did in the software industry, we're trying to do it in the unorganized sector.
Very interesting, Ramesh. Actually, I have a question which is probably the converse of this.
Right.
Software development itself, there is an evergreen debate. Is it art? Is it science? Is it engineering? And there is a growing movement or school of thought that software development is craftsmanship. And many things that, as you were describing, getting the craftsmen organized, having the traditional knowledge or the collective knowledge harnessed, and then making it available to both preserve and also make it contemporary, bringing in new tools and techniques, etc., to make them more productive and to probably make the product creation times shrunk, as well as probably testing some concepts out. How many of these kind of concepts do you think can be transplanted back into the software industry? Because even though we have grown, I guess some of the core challenges that either each individual faces as an engineer or a contributor to a software solution or as organizations can be applied.
You're asking me a reverse question, how basically learnings from the
from the social sector, from organizing craftsmen and artisans, can there be some lessons in terms of helping people getting into the software industry, or even people who've been in the software industry for a while? One, maybe codify or collate the collective knowledge and apply that to become more productive and stay current.
Sure. I mean, well, one is, people in the handicraft sector work a lot hard and earn a lot less actually compared to the IT sector. I think one lesson that people in the IT sector should understand is they shouldn't complain about what they make. And particularly the craft sector, they work very hard to earn a lot less money. So I think you have to learn to respect hard work and basically the constraints under which basically people perform here to make ends meet. So anyway, the other thing is my experience of looking at the artisans is, I think many of them actually take a big pride in the work they do. In fact, that's the reason we called this producer company Artisan Pride. In fact, they came up with their own name. In Kannada, they say Hemme. Hemme means pride. So in the work that we do, we have pride. So that's how Artisan Pride is just an English version of the Kannada name. So I think people should actually, in the software industry, must take pride in the work they do, in the product they produce. So that's one lesson. One thing that is happened is, that even the IT sector, I'll give you an example. Some time ago, there was basically a team of CIOs from Germany who showed up at our unit. And they were part of basically a global training that, there was this European, in Germany, they were sort of for all these CXOs, they were conducting an international training exposure to India and China. So this company training program, there was this training company for senior executives was conducting this exposure visit to India and China. And as a part of their visit, they had to visit basically some traditional Indian sector. And they picked Channapatna and they came to our unit. So I was quite pleasantly surprised to get a visit from 16 German people. Many of them were CIOs. In my IT job, during my IT job, I would have loved to actually pick their business cards and then do follow-up the things on that, follow-up calls on leads. But they just came to look at it. So what I was saying is people are understanding that from there are a lot of markets out here that that internationally people should understand, and so that's why basically even rural Indian customers are actually being sought after by various international companies. So that was basically the anecdote on that. But what can be learned from the craft sector is, I think, our success in this. If we get through this project, there will be certain learnings that will happen that we can actually take to other places. I would say that we are still in the learn mode here.
Yeah, thanks. I think we'll wait for the results of your experiments. because whenever you want some breakthrough innovations, you always look at other sectors.
Correct.
And I definitely find this very fascinating to be able to organize the unorganized sector and also make it international.
Yes, yes, because unless you actually improve the quality of your products and the consistency of the products, you will not be able to export those products, and you'll not be able to sort of get better value realization for your products, and you won't see the volumes. So if you were to sort of jumpstart the livelihood program here and sort of have targets for increasing artisan, say, wages over a period of time, you got to start where the IT industry started. So it's the same thing, like we went and did the CMM level, training or ISO 9000 training, and got people up, the quality, ladder. So we got to do the same thing here.
Yeah, that's very reassuring. I have one question for our guests about the prospects in IT. And this time, after listening to you, I think those who are considering probably what after IT, whether it is post-retirement or even they're looking at a career change, it looks like the social sector also offers a lot of opportunities for people in IT to leverage their experience and create an impact.
No, absolutely. I absolutely think, that the kind of exposure that the IT, folks have, international exposure. We've also seen how businesses are managed, how international customers actually manage business, how basically marketing, sales is done. So this is all absolutely very relevant to the social sector. We can actually uplift the entire social sector with folks from the IT industry. So there's definitely basically a scope for doing something interesting after, if you want to quit your regular job and do this.
On that note, Ramesh, I'd like to thank you for sharing all your experience and also this hope of how everyone can contribute to the social sector. And that's about all the time we have for this episode. I sure would like to catch up with you on many more related questions that have been triggered by what you shared.
Yeah. Thank you, Shiguru, for your time, and then all the best for your podcast.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.